attorney. Just got the recording. Sorry. Daljit Kaur Soni is a workers' right attorney that focuses on food sovereignty, trade justice, and transnational movement building. She has been on the forefront of the Indian farmers movement, and tonight she'll be talking about the farmers movement as well as how it intersects with identity and other aspects of our lives. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Daljit, and I will pull up that video for you if that's what you're starting with first.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to tell them a little bit about the video that they're going to see?
Yeah, sure. So this video was created by an artist based in India. He's a rapper. He used to go by the name of Young Daku, but he recently changed and rebranded. He's now known as Sibu, S-I-B-U. And myself and two professors from American University and a independent food and policy analyst, Indra Shekhar Singh, who's been involved in agrarian affairs for a while now. He studied under the tutelage of Vandana Shiva back in the day. And so we were working together on a conference for South Africa, a virtual conference, because this was during COVID. And we wanted to do something different. We didn't want to just share PowerPoint slides and people kind of in the world of ADHD, we knew we needed to do something different. And so we got him to do a rap song with amazing visuals that you will see that share a captivating story of what the farmers' protest is, why it started, the background of like India and United States agricultural relationships, all the way down to like current day where Bill Gates owns the most farmland in the United States. Why? And so this video helps to kind of paint that picture. And we also have a voiceover by Kayla Marin, who's one of my dear friends from San Francisco. She's an African-American artist who's also from the Garifuna community, which is an indigenous community of mixed African descent. They are descendants of formerly enslaved people that resisted and fought enslavement and ended up in Honduras and different parts of Central America. And so we hear her voice in the background. That's what Maya's going to play for you now.
Let's get it. Yeah, we in the heat of New Delhi with the farmers in the streets. My name is Young Daku and a Daku is a thief. I'm stealing all the pain, the suffering, the grief, cause big ags killing farmers for mimosas on the beach. From roadies to tortillas, Louisiana to Japan. It's your bread or your feet and big ags got a plan. Pennies for the farmers and poison on your plate. Round up, keep rounding up the slaves. Let me give you some context and some history. Farmers growing crops in outright misery. Harvesting suicides, attention please. They're coming for your land, your laws and your countries. I'm talking about an awful plot to rob the crop jobs. Disorder, a rubber stamp to cover it all up. My brain waves going insane to maintain. Poisoning the grain, selling the seeds of death strains. How you gonna bury the aftermath, Modi? The bodies, the bodies, the bodies in the bodies. The proof is in the pudding and the farmers in the capital. All your bills are bogus and you're grabbing all the capital. Agro-business is always so competitive. Smiling, they taught the senators overseas piling skeletons only. A bone to pick, turn the cheek, now we gonna knock you out. So follow this, the motive is to knock you out. You want the profit up, we walking out, remember now. Mobile tragedy, the corpse astounded, happened how? Union Carbide and its toxic cloud, 1 million permanently disabled and many thousands down. Angara vich golna mainu, sanu nahi javange, sanu nahi javange, hum na chhodenge. The problem in the present is the burdened MSP. The setting of the prices and the owner of the seeds. The farmer's gonna die, then where you gonna feed? And everybody's breathing through the burden of your greed. You own the marketplaces and you own the granary. Financing gene drives, aiding biopiracy. Mr. Gates has bought the planet, so what else does he please? Farms without farmers, automation is your key. America, all hail the big ag progenitor. How you gonna save the farmers when you are a predator? Remember this, how they took the land by making settlements. The farmer signs the papers and the same man is a terrorist. A terrorist, we better bury him, make him irrelevant. The wheat is for the taking, harvested by putting lead in him. To strangle it with middlemen in corporation, contract rate and malnutrition, ammunition. Blame religion, better sell your lands and quit. All of it together makes you reminiscent of the British. Growing opium while famine's killing millions. Politics, how will they compete is just irrelevant. Monopolize the capital. settled and selling it and storing it. I'm a little redneck and the devil is a celibate with billions in embezzlement. His pictures on the television, waving fists, sending kids of farmers to fight battles in every border area and evil war from martyrdom. Look at this, come on in, people coming double in. Farmers live strong within, take your bills and let them rip. Double profits, double wins, double crops, GM crops, seed stocks, GMO, God move, overstop. Green revolution in low resolution, they're producing revenue to benefit the very few. Monsanto, Pepsi, Cola, Cargill, Donny and Ambani, opiating populations, burning forests, global warming. Thousands block the capitalists, hundreds dead and hundreds more are pouring in. You knew this, can't Google this, move a bit. I just wanna let you know how I feel, this is real, come and see. Their leaf farmers giving this for free. I just wanna let you know how I feel, this is real, come and see. New Delhi farmers giving love for free. Get big or get out.
Do you
So that was the video. I hope you guys like that. But it's a different way of communicating the story. And we know that in the digital age, having music, sound bites, short snippets are really helpful. So we're really grateful to Cebu for coming through with that rap video. Please share it with as many people as you can. It really helps to spread the word. So I have some slides to kind of just break down what the farmers' revolution was about and how that impacted women and me. Should I share the slides, Maya, or were you going to? Should I do it myself? I can do it myself. It's not a big deal.
Whichever one is easiest for you.
Okay, why don't I just share? All right, can you guys see? Okay, great. It's loading. So I'm working right now with Disparity to Parity, and I'll share a little bit more about that project. It's been around for a few years, started by a coalition of policymakers, activists, farmers, all with the goal of revolutionizing the food system and making it more equitable and just. So we're doing some fun research with undergraduate students at American University. And what the Indian Farmers' Revolution was about. You heard the video. This is the longest, largest resistance in human history. And 1 in 30 people on the planet last year was involved in this resistance. This was sparked by ordinances that were passed in June that were set to privatize agriculture, that would allow corporations to hoard grain, to control the market, and to be free of any state taxes, and to be free of having to provide a benchmark price to farmers in a state-run market. In India, agriculture is within the jurisdiction of the state. But these laws were then passed in September unconstitutionally, without due process, in a voice vote during a COVID lockdown, classic case of disaster capitalism, which is written about a lot by Naomi Klein. And nonetheless, the farmer unions were prepared and they started organizing back in the summer. And so we know that in California, where you live, the United Farm Workers Movement used the same strategy of house-to-house meetings. The farmers here were very keen and aware of what the implications of these privatization bills were going to be. This was going to destroy their right to food sovereignty, their right to control what kind of food they produce and to get a fair price for that, to be able to have culturally appropriate food. That's food sovereignty. So this battle was about food sovereignty. Nonetheless, it was a hard struggle. It was 750 people died during this year through COVID, through heat stress, through mosquitoes. Imagine your grandparents having to walk 2 miles to go to the bathroom in the woods. There were no toilets. This was not a convenient occupation. This was not like Occupy. I was part of Oakland Occupy. This was not like that. The infrastructure, the planning that was required to get this off the ground was unprecedented. And why? They knew that this was a threat. These farmers, you could talk to any farmer at any of the 4 tent cities that were established at the borders leading to Delhi. Anyone that you spoke to could tell you who the enemy was and why they were there. They were there to fight against California agriculture. They don't want Punjab to turn into California. India is one of the final bastions of agriculture on this planet. 53% of people in India rely on agriculture for a living. That's 600 million people. That's a lot of people. And in India, it's not like big ag. People there, on average, own 1 to 5 acres of land. That's very small. And so they're fighting for their livelihood because agriculture is their culture. They consider the land their mother. And that kind of ideology is infused through the scripture, the art, the poetry, the songs, the ballads, and the revolutionary songs that came back to life during this movement. So this is a cultural renaissance, and people are going to be talking about this for decades. And just to, if you walk away with anything, it's important to know that this farmers' revolution didn't just start like 2 years ago or even 10 years ago. This has been brewing for hundreds of years. Before the British came to colonize India, people in India operated in agriculture in a self-reliant way, and there were interconnected, interdependent relationships between the barber and the blacksmith and the weaver and the pottery person and the farmer. These were interconnected relationships that were completely destroyed by the British colonial system of extraction. When the colonial regime of Britain would enter a new area to conquer, they would survey the land and then they would survey the people. And they determined that the people of Punjab, my folks, were good for fighting their wars and good for producing food. And so we see the struggles during the 1900s center around that access to land. And then we see during the rise of the Gandhian movement and in the Ghadar movement that wasn't always peaceful, because that's not the way that independence was won. It wasn't nonviolent on its own. There was a lot of militant resistance. And there was resistance to being the indigo provider of the world. And there were the struggles changed with time. By the 1990s, neoliberal economic reforms were hitting all developing countries. And so we heard, at that time, people were struggling for economic means, for a minimum support price. And we saw that the most recent protests by South Indian farmers got real because they were drinking blood out of the skulls of farmers that had died by suicide. They were drinking rat piss, not because this was sensational, a sensational desire to be covered by the news, but they were desperate to be heard by a government that didn't speak their language and that didn't care about them. And so we see that with the farmers' protest, that the harms were also exacerbated by what happened before the neoliberal reforms. And that's what happened in the 60s and the 50s and 60s. On the heels of Britain leaving, India's supply chain system was destroyed. And so India had a lot of food, but it was always being produced to feed the crown all over the world. And so when they left, that system needed help and there were famines. And so who stepped in? The United States. Why? Because there was a battle happening between the United States and the Soviet Union at that time for these battleground states like India that were developing or third world. Because if India relied on the Soviet Union more so to get out of the depths of this newly decolonized state, then the United States would have less power in this Asian region. And so what they did was crop dump all of the grain that was overproduced during World War II. When the European farmers were in the trenches, American farmers increased their production. They were told by the government to plant fence row to fence row, and that screwed them up. That's why family farmers are gone in the United States. All that excess wheat was dumped in India because they were starving. And to get them off that ship to mouth existence, magic seeds were introduced through the help of philanthrocapitalists like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation. And we see this same model being used now in Africa. You should follow the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa and the Community Alliance for Global Justice in Seattle. They are doing great work to fight the Bill Gates agenda, which would have the Green Revolution repeat its ills that destroyed family farms in Mexico, that destroyed the people, soil, and ecosystem of Punjab. And they want to do that in the continent of Africa. And we say, don't do it because it doesn't work. You may get a high yield for like 10, 12 years. In the 60s, these magic seeds that my dad got were producing like wild, and it helped India to become self-sufficient. And it helped it to reach this like world's largest democracy status. But what did it do to the soil? It's depleted the groundwater. Punjab is going to become a desert in 12 years. It's caused cancer clusters. Punjab is known, there's cancer trains. They're known as the cancer trains. Everybody on there has cancer because of the heavy use of pesticide, fertilizer, and this has resulted in a debt to death cycle where every 30 minutes a farmer commits suicide. How does this affect women? 80% of the work that's done on farms, according to Oxfam, is done by women. They're the ones that are harvesting, they're sowing the seeds, they're sinnowing, they're cultivating, and they're engaging in hard labor. But they only own 12% of the land. And that's because of the vestiges of patriarchy that are rooted in the agricultural laws and the whole system that denies and makes these women farmers invisible. The same male farmer has access to those resources like loans, insurance, cooperatives. And the United Nations has actually found that if those same resources were shared, were provided to women as well, that would actually increase the yield of crops by 20 to 30%, and then would help alleviate hunger for 150 million people. So what are we doing by not advancing the causes of women that are food producers, that are feeding 70% of the world? The reality for women farmers because of this suicide epidemic is that their burdens have increased. Their burdens in child rearing, their burdens in providing education for their child while continuing to complete household chores and engage in farm work. And oftentimes, a recent survey actually showed that oftentimes these women they don't own the land because only 2% of land that's passed of the hereditary is actually given to women. The bulk is to men because of tradition and culture. So half of most women don't get their land even like 6 to 10 years later. And so that's a huge source of gender discrimination and gender disparity. But nonetheless, we see these women rise up. And I want to just put into context that before this farmers' revolution started in 2020, in 2019, we had draconian laws against minority communities, the Muslim community. And so we saw Muslim women rise up and lead a 3-month occupation of Shaheen Bagh from December to March that was largely peaceful, that was cracked down in a violent way. And a lot of those people that were picked up remain in jail today. This woman here that's on the cover of Time magazine, her name is, I don't know her last name, but her name is Bilquis. She's 82 years old, and she became like the symbol of the movement. She became the face of the movement, this woman that wouldn't leave. And all the art and the poetry that was produced from this period really helped to set the stage, I believe, for the Indian farmers' revolution to take hold and for it to become intercaste and interreligious and intersectional. People were fed up, and there were so many different movements that didn't win their ultimate demand that came through to support. And we saw that, and I'll talk about that later when we get through to the timeline. And this picture here with the women wearing yellow, this is also really important symbolically. Yellow is the color of mustard fields, and mustard fields are all over Punjab and northern India. And these women are wearing these yellow chunnis. This is called the chunni, this headscarf. And it's to also commemorate Bhagat Singh. And Bhagat Singh's favorite flower was the mustard seed. And Bhagat Singh, we don't hear about enough. We hear a lot about Gandhi, but we never hear about Bhagat Singh because it's not a pretty story. Bhagat Singh was executed at the age of 24. He was a poet, he was intellectual, he was a revolutionary, he was ahead of his time. And he shot a British general who had massacred hundreds of people in Punjab at the time at the height of the Ghadar movement, which was the independence movement from the British regime. And so They're wearing yellow to commemorate him. And his great-grandchildren showed up at this protest site. And Shahid Bhagat Singh's uncle was the one that was leading fights for land access against the British in the 1900s. So we see this intergenerational legacy in action at the Morcha site. And so this is, again, a cultural renaissance. At the Morcha site itself, we also saw that gender dynamics were shifted. Langar duties were shared, and Langar is the Sikh concept. The Sikh religion is fairly new. It's a monotheistic religion, and a majority of the people from Punjab that are farmers practice the Sikh faith that preaches one God, oneness, equality. And Langar is that example of oneness where everybody can get free food 24 hours a day, no matter what caste they are. And so it's that act of sitting in communion with your brother, regardless of what religion they practice. And so that's what we saw. We saw Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs breaking bread together. And we also saw men and women engaging in all the preparatory work to feed hundreds and thousands of people that were at these tent sites for more than a year. There were two main days that women had controlled the central stage, but by and large, this was a male-dominated movement. We did see women coming in droves in the thousands, and many of them were led by union leaders that we'll talk about later. We also saw the Supreme Court justices make really offensive comments questioning why so many women were at the protests. And they were insinuating that, of course, these women are like, subjects of abuse that are, being held there captive against their will. And the women retorted against that in multiple media interviews, saying that we deserve to be here. Our societies are falling apart. You are threatening our livelihood. Our brothers, our husbands, our sons are committing suicide because they're depressed by this overburdened debt and the thought of losing their homes and becoming farm workers who are treated horribly. And so they remained at the sites, and they're adamant in their tone. They were also attacked after January 26th, which we'll talk about a little bit. And so we also saw that they were vulnerable in that sense. The safety of women in India is an issue. And we see that with a lot of the indexes that measure safety, peace, and freedom all declining. India has lost its ranking as a peaceful country and is now gone from free to partly free. In November, we saw the most important, I think, the most important kind of fact out of this whole story is when the different unions united. There were 500 different organizations and 40 main farm unions that joined together to form SKM, or Samyukt Kisan Morcha. Once that happened in October, there was unity, there was direction, there was an organized resistance. And they're the ones that led the call so that hundreds and thousands of farmers left their homes with rations for 6 months in their tractor trolleys, all of them heading to the capital. And they were met with huge police barricades and paramilitary personnel. They dug 15-foot ditches to trap their tractors. They were being beaten with like water cannons. Elderly farmers were being beaten with cannons and batons, but it didn't deter them because they were in the spirit of Chardi Kala. And Chardi Kala is that Sikh concept of optimism, of continuing to fight for truth no matter what, and like seeing the glass as half full instead of half empty. And we saw that vibe at all of the campsites. On January 26th, however, after a few unsuccessful meetings between the government and the farm unions, and mind you, the Modi regime has never sat down with anybody demanding anything from them, ever. This was the first time that the Indian government actually sat down with an opposition to try to negotiate. Negotiations failed, and the farm unions strategized to engage in a tractorcade on the same day that India was going to be engaged in this pompous parade celebrating the Republic. Violence ensued, and with that violence, a pretext was formed to round up farmers left and right. So if you were a Punjabi Sikh man with a beard and a turban on a train, on a bus, anywhere, you were going to get picked up and you were going to get locked up. And many of these folks remain behind bars. And we in the diaspora were really scared on the days leading up to this. We tried really hard to lobby our congressional officials, our elected officials, and we got pushback. We got tweets that were done that were very fake and safe. The only thing that they talked about was human rights, but nobody talked about the substance of the bill. Why? Because the United States government actually said in October that these bills help them. They help the bottom line because it allows us to produce, overproduce, and then crop dump. And same thing with Canada. But then things all kind of, So this is also really important to know. Daljit Kaur is a symbol of this movement as well. And she's a student like you, but during COVID, her family was struggling. She comes from a Dalit community, a historically oppressed caste. And so she had to get to work. When she was working in this factory, she saw that her coworkers still had not gotten paid from the first time of the COVID shutdown from the coronavirus. And so she became a union organizer and she asserted her right to represent them for their right to unpaid wages. She also brought hundreds and hundreds of factory workers to the campsite at the Singhu border, and she was arrested. She was beaten, she was tortured, she was taken to an offsite location, and she was sexually assaulted. She was in jail for nearly 2 months. And we tried really hard all over, all of us in the third Punjab. There's a East and West Punjab in Pakistan and India because it was split in half after independence. But there's also a third Punjab, which is the diaspora. And there are so many of us in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, and all of us were fighting for her to be released, as well as journalists and a climate change activist who got in trouble for a toolkit, and that created a lot of drama. Greta Thunberg also supported the farmers' protest in a tweet after Rihanna did, and all hell broke loose. These BJP supporters, the political party of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the BJP, the RSS. This is a racist political party that is very dangerous. They're paramilitary and they spew hate. And so here we see them burning pictures of Mia Khalifa, Mina Harris, and Rihanna. And these are all women influencers that were simply asking, why isn't the media talking about this? There was 250 million people that went out on strike on November 26th. It wasn't just farmers. There were workers of every stripe, hospital workers, government workers, train workers, transportation workers. Everybody went on strike, 250 million people, and no one covered it in the American news. We barely heard about it. They don't want you to know. Why don't they want you to know? Nonetheless, people in the diaspora, we believe our voices are our weapons. And so we used our voices, we used our platforms. If we were artists, we used our art. And then some of us even started Kisan sleepouts where people would sleep on the streets to raise awareness about our folks in India on the highways for a year and a half. We also pulled together resources through solidarity, and we saw Justice for Migrant Women led by Monica Ramirez, who is a powerhouse. She's also been, I think last year she was one of the Time Women of the Year. She's also was responsible for the Me Too movement and getting farm workers attention in that arena. She helped to get an ad in the New York Times, and 75 organizations signed on. And that was a huge sign of support and also a wake-up call to the Indian government that they can't get away with these human rights abuses. To boost morale, we also organized a global webinar that was for 9 hours long. And this is the first time that I heard about overproduction. And this is the first time through Dr. Garrett Grady Lovelace, a professor at American University. She shared that there is actually a crisis of overproduction, and that this overproduction can be solved through policies like supply management. This opened my eyes to so much. And since that moment, I am continuing to learn about how to solve these issues. Things did get ugly in October. This picture right here is of the son of a farm union leader who openly said that he could fix the farmers in a few minutes in Hindi, which sounds worse in Hindi. He was basically saying that he could like physically threaten them, abuse them to kind of acquiesce. And then a few days later, his son on videotape, and I saw the videotape, murders 4 farmers protesting from the back, and he is out of jail. He is not going to be prosecuted. Why did this happen? Because a few months earlier, the farmer unions had switched their strategy. They're smart, they're strategic, and they started traveling nationwide to all the battleground states to try to put pressure on the BJP party, and it worked. And so that electoral pressure caused anger, and that anger is what led to this Lakhimpur Kheri massacre, to which there's been no accountability. The laws were eventually repealed, but it's not a complete victory, because what they were asking for was economic justice, a minimum support price, and that hasn't been obtained. And that's important because climate change, 1/3 of like greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. And we know that we need to switch from this industrial agricultural model, and agroecology works. There's so many cases, and that's not what this presentation is about, but we need to get away from this. And so that's why we are supporting farmers all over the world, like farmers in France, Spain, and Germany, who in 2020 were all protesting. I mean, the farmers in France, they got really creative. They hung dummies from trees in front of Parliament. And in Spain, the farmer unions engaged in tractorcades, and they were successful. They got the first law in the world to actually fine hundreds and thousands of dollars grocery stores if they sell food that is below the cost of production that ends up exploiting a farmer. And so that was a huge win. But farmers in Europe are also under a different dilemma because all of their agricultural policies are subject to the European Union. Nonetheless, we are still working on this, and we know that movement building requires narrative shifting. And so that's why we're engaged in these Instagram live interviews. Please join us tomorrow at 3 o'clock your time. We'll be interviewing Dr. Garrett Grady Lovelace about the Disparity and Parity Project. We have about 4 or 5 interviews that are already up, and they all connect the dots on the farmers' protest, food sovereignty, and human rights. Solidarity is really movement building, and we know that solidarity is power. I encourage you to check out A Growing Culture, which really helps to flesh this out with all of their work on their website and in their social media. We also engage in a project where we had farmers and other activists issue videos just showing their support and sharing that the farmers have inspired them. And everybody kind of had an organic theme that was the same, that they could recognize that the farmers in India had courage, they were resilient, they were committed. And those are all ideals that, that we can learn from as we engage in our own forms of resistance. And what you can do to help is definitely buy local, connect with your local supply chains. Who are the local farms? Are there any CSAs that you can sign up to? Check out the videos and the essays that are on our Disparity and Parity website. They really flesh out these policies, and then they help kind of set the stage for a student to understand what a just and sustainable food system can look like. And that's about it.
That's awesome. Do you want to maybe stop the share so we can see you big and clear, and maybe save some room for questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
So how is this, first of all, out of the people who are here, who was already familiar with this issue before coming tonight? Okay, I don't see any hands up. Did anybody, oh, Maya's got her hand up. Did anybody learn anything that was surprising to you? Daljit, I'm gonna just share some questions while I'm waiting for people to think of theirs. One of the things you mentioned was that it was important to the farmers involved with the strike to not become, you said they wanted to make sure not to have California agriculture. And I think, unless we've studied this issue, a lot of us who are here in California don't know, like, tell us, why would people not want to have California agriculture? What's the side of it that people might not know about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So people from Punjab have been immigrating to California to work on its agricultural system since the 1800s. So a lot of the irrigation that we see in the San Joaquin Central Valley is courtesy of these Punjabi farmers bringing their wisdom and their traditional knowledge and sharing it to make California this large agricultural economy. California is a source of big ag, almond farmers, peach farmers, the dairy farms, the mega dairy farms. This is not normal, and it's considered to be efficient, but it's also extremely extractive. And California has an issue with water. And, when you're growing almonds in a climate like California, you're not helping climate change, you're making it worse. Almonds require huge amounts of water, and they shouldn't be grown in the Sacramento Valley, but yet they are, because it's a cash crop. So food has been commodified, and California is a big source of that commodification.
Thank you. What questions are coming up for people? Maya, you came into this already having some familiarity with the topic. Is there anything that's kind of, I don't know, really catching your attention today?
I think my questions are related of how do you stay motivated to keep on going? Like there's been many hurdles along the way. There's been many like folks that have been like stopping you from like progressing in many organizations, and especially like the government, obviously. But like how do you keep on going, and like is there like what support do you use to keep going?
That's a great question. There's been highs and lows. It's like a roller coaster, like any movement. It's a movement, right? So movements have waves. There's ups and downs, there's highs and lows. And I think that it was a real, I guess, oxymoron or ironic when everyone was celebrating this win. I was actually on a Zoom call organizing a global webinar for the movement. And so I'm with other fellow activists on the call when we hear that the laws were repealed, and I didn't believe it. And my second thought was, but they didn't get MSP. Like, this isn't good. But I'm also very privileged and comfortable in my home here in the United States. I'm not the person that has been sleeping in a tractor trolley. And so I had to have that level of respect, as not being someone on the front line and being someone that is in the diaspora, being removed from the challenges. But I was extremely upset. I was extremely disappointed that they went home without that legal guarantee, and that the unions had made that decision. And because I just felt like it's going to be so hard to win that now. And if they had won that, it would have revolutionized trade and the whole food system, because it would have had a ripple effect, because then farmer groups in other countries would have been similarly mobilized that we can win this too. Or other countries would have just done it on their own, perhaps, because seeing that this is coming. Now we see that farmers are a force, and they're a force that need to be reckoned with. What keeps me going is, I think, my faith. Having faith is really important, and my kids, knowing that I want them to live in a world that isn't suffering like it is right now. And so I think when we're able to make the struggles intersectional, it makes it easier to keep going, because you know that your struggle, although it may be focused on a fair price for a farmer for his crops, that's still connected to the people that are fighting for climate justice, the people that are fighting for racial justice, the people that are fighting for gender equality, that it's all interconnected. And so that kind of helps me to continue. And also the interest of US-based farmers and US-based farmer groups, and just speaking to them and hearing from them, especially the elderly farmers that remember what the tractorcades of 1979 were like, the ones that remember what it was like to grow up in Iowa before it became this corn hub with poisoned water. I mean, do we even know this, that like the United States produces so much corn, not to feed people, but to feed cows and cars, and that places like Iowa and Wisconsin had thriving rural communities. And there's also this rural urban divide that this revolution kind of exposed, that oftentimes urban communities have no idea what rural communities are going through or what the purpose or benefit is of a strong rural economy. And so we see that with kind of the book that Congressman Ro Khanna just wrote about the digital divide. And he's actually making that argument that the jobs in the Silicon Valley don't have to be in the Silicon Valley. They should go to places like Ohio and Nebraska and places that are struggling in the Midwest. So that helps to kind of keep me going, that there's all these old people that have a memory of what a successful farming community looks like, that are in shock and that can't solve it on their own, that, you know, they're going to die and that wisdom is going to die with them, but that they can inspire us to continue the fight, and that there's all these young farmers that want to farm. And it's not easy. It's not easy farming in this world. And how can we make it? Not everybody needs to farm, but how can we work together so that big ag isn't destroying our land and our natural resources?
I love that response, and I love how interconnected it is, and how far the issues go out, right? Even to think about a high tech or like something from the tech industry being located in another part of the country. What is Ro Khanna's book title?
The digital divide is in the title. He was just on Amy Goodman just interviewed him on Democracy Now!, which if you don't listen to, I would highly recommend you listen to.
For sure, everybody should listen to Democracy Now! We play it on KPFA.
Yeah.
It's on at 6 and 9 in California, 6 a.m. and 9, or you can just ask Amazon, your like Alexa device, to play it for you whenever you want.
Yeah.
You know, so if people are interested in this topic, or maybe you're thinking about it for the first time, I think a lot of us might eat without putting much thought into it sometimes, or like, you know, you get your food from the grocery store and we don't always think about the roots of it. So later on this week, we're going to have the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition come in. And it's making me think of one topic that comes up a lot, and maybe you'll have something to say about this too, Daljit. I'm just gonna ask, and you can opt out if you would like to, but I've noticed in like California, Wisconsin, there was one time in history, like when I was a child, 250 years ago, they used to like, you know, we had this food. My daughter's calling me out. I didn't exist 250 years ago, but a long time ago, you know, we looked at the food pyramid, and there was like, when they were advertising for milk, it was like, milk, it does a body good. And now like in places like Wisconsin, the whole campaign is like, help a farmer drink milk. And so I wonder, I don't know, have you looked into at all like the ways in which the food pyramid is more related to the foods that we're producing than what actually our bodies need to have, or kind of that guilt tripping consumption mechanism that we're starting to see, I feel like more and more.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. That hasn't been an area that I've delved into deeply, but I know Raj Patel has written a lot about this from the nutritional standpoint, that like, and that also comes from like policy speak of the 1970s, where the focus was food security, and food security was focused on like caloric intake and like nutrition. And so that begs the question, it makes me think of that in particular. And the Food Empowerment Project, which is based in San Jose, just started a campaign about no to dairy, and they raised some of those health and nutritional concerns. I feel torn on this issue. As a Punjabi person, milk is in our diet and in our custom and in our traditions, but like the kind of milk that my parents grew up drinking isn't the kind of milk that they fed us here. And when at my first job as a migrant staff attorney with California Rural Legal Assistance in Fresno, exposed me to the dairy industry because we had a dairy worker project there. And we tried to do some environmental work under CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA is amazing. So if any of you guys have any inklings in like law or like trying to be a lawyer, California is an amazing place to do environmental law. Trust me, like it's probably the best state in the United States to practice it. Don't go to the East Coast to practice environmental law because there's no laws there that'll help you. But CEQA is amazing. And we were able to use CEQA to challenge mega dairy expansion because folks in LA were really strong and loud, and they pushed the mega dairies and like we NIMBY, you know, not in our backyard, but the folks in the Central Valley didn't have the same power and clout. And so all these mega dairies, they come down to Central Valley and they produce. And so most people know, what do they know about the Valley? It's the place that smells, that stinks when they're driving between the Bay Area and LA. It's where all the cows are. Those cows smell because they're not supposed to be in confined animal feeding operations. CAFOs are wrong. And actually, Ro Khanna and Cory Booker just proposed a bill to ban like mega dairy expansions. But it doesn't matter because there's so many of them, and like 2,000 cows is too much. 1,000 cows is too much. 500 cows is too much in a tiny area. And what do these dairies do? They're exploitative at 3 levels: to the environment, because cow fart is a greenhouse gas emission; to the water, because the cow shit contaminates the water, especially if they don't have lining in the pits. They call them the lagunas, the negras lagunas, these black lagoons. And like there's been cases where like someone will fall into the pit of poop, of cow poop. And we've had cases where folks in Stockton, a father was on a tractor following his child who fell into the lagoon. They both fell into it, and it was like quicksand, and they died. There was no liner, there was no gate. Okay, these dairies are a huge problem, but that doesn't mean that all milk is bad. I mean, I'm dairy intolerant. I have GI issues. I can't drink milk. It's really personal, but you know, I don't think that we need to get rid of dairies altogether. In Canada, they have supply management. Supply management is just policies that control production. There are trade quotas that limit how much you can send out and limit how much you can bring in. But Trump, when he was president, he hated supply management because it protected the dairy farmers in Canada. Whereas dairy farmers in the United States, when COVID hit, what were they doing? They were dumping milk down the drain, gallons and gallons of milk just going down the drain because there's nowhere to send it to, because their milk only went to schools and prisons or places that were shut down. And so there was no supply chain like solution or plan for that excess milk. So we need supply management. Every 5 years, the United States passes a farm bill. And that's the opportunity for us to lobby for these types of policies that are revamped, that come from the New Deal, that benefited mostly white male farmers, but they were good. And then we can build on that to make it equitable, to make sure that it doesn't treat people of color poorly, because this is also important for you to know. In the Build Back Better Act, or the different type of laws that Biden was trying to pass early on in his presidency, there's $5 billion earmarked for farmers of color. Why? Because in a class action lawsuit, Pigford versus Glickman, those class action lawsuits, fact was determined out of those lawsuits that the USDA discriminated against people of color. The USDA historically denied Black people loans. And so only 2% of African Americans have farms. There are more people in prison than we have people that farm. And so this was kind of like reparations, acknowledging that the government engaged in discriminatory practices. You could be a Black person showing up for a farm loan, and that white person that was at that farm aid department would just throw your loan application in the garbage right in front of you. And we have interviewed these types of people with the Disparity to Parity project. And there's evidence of this. There's archival evidence of this. And so they deserve that money. They deserve that compensation. But what happened? 13 lawsuits were filed in response to that earlier this year, and an injunction was issued. So that money is blocked. That money is never going out. And so this is like continued continued assaults on African American people who were never given 40 acres and a meal as they were promised. And so this kind of inequity within our food system, it has to be addressed. And yeah.
Cool. And well, thank you so much. And while people are thinking of other questions, or, maybe we'll have a little time at the end just to share something that we're taking away. Another topic that we've talked about here at times is mass incarceration, or we've looked at police brutality. And so when we talk about food justice, it's also interesting to look at the experience that incarcerated people are having around food. There was a time before when we talk, like, I think Daljit is talking a lot about the strike was about privatization, right, of farm property, but even like privatization of the prison system meant that incarcerated people stopped getting quality food. It now, as I have been speaking with people during the pandemic, it's like Kool-Aid chips, highly processed food, right? And so it's kind of interconnected to all the different levels of society and all the different things that we talk about.
Absolutely. Emily, you had a question?
Emily, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, why do you think it's not broadcasted much in the news? Like this idea, like the struggle of this food system, why isn't it like more acknowledged in our news and like media? Because like looking at the PowerPoint, I realized I didn't know a lot of this was happening, and I was like, why wasn't this broadcasted? Why wasn't this theme more acknowledged?
Right. Well, the media, the fourth estate is hard to break the news cycle, especially if you don't fit in with what's the mainstream wants to hear about. And international issues are historically not something mainstream American media cares about. And we saw that with the New York Times ad that we worked really hard on to get 75 organizations to sign on to. When it was, we have to strategically time stuff. And unfortunately, the date that this was going to get published, I think it was a Monday, the storm happened in Texas. Do you remember that? Like where the power went out. And so that controlled the news cycle. And so you just couldn't get in as a headline. And we are in the world of ADHD. It's like a few words and that's it. And then people don't have attention spans to listen. And so I think that's one problem. But I do think that with COVID, the fact that it was exposed that we share the air that we breathe, we also share our food system. The fact that tankers, those large tankers, are in short supply that come from China, and there's all these bottlenecks in the sea where like shipments aren't getting to the ports in LA. That's a supply chain issue. It may not necessarily be a food system issue, but it's getting us closer. And so the more we have people thinking about why is toilet paper running out, or why can't I get access to the materials I need to renovate my bathroom, that starts to get people thinking that this system is shared, that globalization has that our food system is also shared. It doesn't mean that we all need the same type of food system, but our agricultural policies are going to impact the peasant communities and the small farmers in Nicaragua, in Mexico, in India, in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, that there's ripple effects. And so I think the reason why you didn't hear about it is because the mainstream don't want you to know. Our own government benefits from these laws passing. So why would they want you to know?
Okay,
It also just underscores the need for us as active citizens to seek out news that is alternative. And so looking to KPFA instead of CNN is going to get you closer to that kind of information. Reading articles on the civil eats, following people on Twitter like me, or like a Growing Culture or Kisan Ekta Morcha, is what exposes you to news that you wouldn't if you just stick to the American news cycle. I mean, Time magazine and all these other kinds of global magazines have one cover for the United States and a different cover for the rest of the world. We live in a bubble. The news we get is highly curated. You have to fight hard to get the truth.
Thank you. That's such an important question. And yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. There's also a documentary. I don't know if you've seen it, Daljit, but it's called What the Health. Have any of you heard of it?
No.
It's really interesting. And somebody takes on the question, like they look on the websites of like the American Cancer Society, the Diabetes Association, all these places, and they're looking at the foods and the recipes that it recommends people to eat. And then they're like, wait, these are the same exact things that also cause like heart conditions and cause cancer. And then they dig in, and then they find out that the people sponsoring these companies, like the top founders between like American Cancer Society and some of these other organizations, are sometimes the foods that some believe might have a link to the problems when consumed in excess. So it's really interesting, and it's always worth questioning sort of the bottom line, right? The dollar.
Yes. I recommend this book. Check it out, or Google it. Inflamed, by Raj Patel and Rupa Maria. So Rupa Maria is in your neck of the woods. She's a doctor at SF General who is an activist. She's so badass. And they have written this book. It's called Deep Medicine and Anatomy of Injustice. And each chapter is like the circulatory system, the respiratory system, and they talk about food, and they talk about what you're talking about and how that's all connected. And I learned so much through this book. And Rupa Maria's work is like in action. She started the deep medicine farms, where they're rooftop farms in different parts of Oakland, and they're harvesting microgreens and produce that they then give to Oakland public schools. And they're also working to rematriate indigenous land in the Bay Area that belongs, to the Ohlone tribe. And so all this amazing work that is like intersectional, and that is it's a part of land back, but also like having being in right relationship with the soil, to serve community, and with public health as the goal. So I highly recommend checking that out. And she's also a musician. She plays in a band called April and Fishes or something like that.
I feel like I've heard of her. Can you repeat the name of the book?
Yes, I'm gonna try to find. They did a really good video when they first released the book, and it was really well done. And so I'm going to share that YouTube video, and I think that will help you all to understand the points that they're trying to make about our food system, our healthcare system, and how the world is inflamed, and we as a reflection of the world are also inflamed. And there's some really interesting statistics there, just like off of COVID as well. They studied the people in London, and it showed that Asian people and African descendants were like 3 times more likely to get COVID and die of COVID than like their white counterparts. And so it's also this study of how racism impacts health.
Oh, and you've included that in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, this is great. And I know our time is going way too quickly. I'm not sure how much longer you want to stay awake, but before we go, we have just a couple housekeeping things at the very end. This question is rhetorical, because I know that everybody here gets it, but I always like to hear, I'd love to hear your response to this. But one of the things as we advertise this program, we said an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. We amplified the quote by Martin Luther King Jr. But if people don't understand like what's in it for, like, kind of the what's in it for me question. So why is it important that people in the United States and across the world care about the issue of farming in India? Like, what does that have to do with people here?
That's a good question. So if you were like a Republican conservative that was worried about the border and migration, I would argue that if you destroy family farms in the global South, then you are asking for more migrants at your border. because these people will be forced to flee. They will be dispossessed of their land, and they will be forced to enter the urban market for jobs, and there are none there. And so these people will resort to the life-threatening journey of getting to the global north for a livelihood.
Thank you.
welcome.
Okay, before we leave, I do have Daljit's contact information. Daljit, can you tell people how they can follow you to keep up with you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter and Instagram with that handle. And on Instagram, every Thursday, we've been doing interviews with an actress activist, Monica Gill. And I tweet a lot. And then you can also email me if you ever have any questions, you want to chat about my slides or anything, feel free to email me.
Okay, and we will do a quick drawing in just a quick second. Well, actually, Maya, I'm going to have you, like whatever system you want to do, we do a drawing and we have somebody will win something. So Maya, you can choose a winner using one of your systems. If they're leaving, obviously, they're not. No, honey. And the other thing I just wanted to say for those of you who are here, there's somebody who's coming to Berkeley tomorrow. It's the film director from 100 Days from Mississippi, Tarabu Betzerai Kirkland, with the film. And I am happy to sponsor tickets for people who would like to go who happen to not have plans tomorrow. I know it's St. Patrick's Day. If you're interested, they'll send me an email or put your name in the chat and we can connect about that tomorrow. Otherwise, let's do the drawing with Maya and then we'll thank Daljit for her time and I'll let you all get back to your evening. Maya.
Hi, friends. So I used a random number generator and it popped up 5. And so the 5th person on my screen is Brady.
All right, Brady, you can pop by the Center for Women and Gender Equity tomorrow. Everybody should come by anyways. You can get coffee and gluten-free or regular pastries. And thank you for coming, everyone. And thank you, Daljit. Thanks for staying up very late with us this evening. We really appreciate your time. Let's give her some appreciation, everyone.
Thank you. This was a pleasure. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the semester. You guys are in good hands with Sharon. She's amazing.
I'm taking one more picture of you all. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Daljit. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, thank you.